Fantastic. Well, first of all, thank you all for taking time out of your day and welcome. Our goal is always just to provide as much great HR information as we absolutely can to folks out there in the community. And regardless of what industry you may come from, right, there's always things that we can learn, particularly when we start talking about culture and how do you build culture. And we're going to spend a lot of time today specifically talking about it in terms of remote and hybrid because that is so common, right? But to be honest, all of these tips and best practices work really well in an all in person office, right? We just always find that folks are needing to try a little harder when they're remote and hybrid. And so there's unique challenges that come to this. But none of the things that we talk about today will be like, well, if you're all in person, you can't use this information. It will be really helpful regardless. And when we think about, for those of you who have not met us regularly through our webinars and so forth, when we think about HR, we really come at it from the perspective of it's not just about parties and picnics, and culture is more than that. And sometimes you do need to do the fun things, but reality is culture and employee engagement comes from a much broader range of connections with people. And it's really about how are we building relationships? How do we build environments where people can be successful working well together? And that's more than just we throw a party every couple of weeks and that makes people happy. True engagement comes when we're doing the small things day to day correctly. To give a little bit of background on my prior experience and what we've done with the organization. So I started People Solution Center. It will actually be 10 years in February. So we're actually ramping up on the 10-year anniversary shenanigans along the way. And then we have truly built a consulting firm. So I have a team of 8. We work with our clients across the country to help with everything from recruiting and placement to building great cultures, as well as what you typically think of HR from a compliance perspective. But building the team has given me a really unique experience. One, I have to practice what I preach every day, right? And I have the added, I'm not sure if it's an advantage of disadvantage, but my team hears me speak, so they know that I know what to do. I have to actually execute it on a daily basis. My background and experience comes from I spent most of my career in corporate HR. I worked regionally here in the St. Louis market for one of our larger banks. And then I worked for 15 years for Progressive Insurance. I was I was an HR manager for them for several years. And then I was their director of recruiting for all their claims and contact centers. So a team of about 70 to 80 people at any given time. So I have my entire career had a unique HR journey of not only being the HR person and sort of helping others do this from a leadership perspective, but I've had to do it all myself. And now, as a business owner for the last going on 10 years, really having to like walk the walk and talk the talk and do this all really well. And that has come with so many learnings and examples. And I love to be able to share that information as we go through these kinds of conversations. So as I said, first of all, I will always share the slides and the recording after the session. So if there's anything that you want to be able to refer back to, I'm very open with that information. And in addition to that, we will make sure that everybody gets contact information after this so that we can ensure we connect. But also feel free to ask questions as we go along. So this should be really pertinent to you. And even if you're like, I have a question and it's not on a slide anywhere, but I need to know, like put it in the chat. We'll absolutely make sure that we make that happen. But the whole idea behind building culture is about going from just, hey, when we get together for happy hours, we seem to have fun. And instead, how do you build an environment where the team works really well without you as the leader having to be in the middle of that? Right? That they can go to each other with their challenges and their problems versus you are kind of some organizations end up kind of in a hub and spoke setting, right? Where the leader's in the middle and everybody goes to the leader, but nobody ever talks with one another. That's usually an environment where we find they're not thriving. And so there's a couple of key strategies that you really have to pay attention to in order to make this work. And some of my background, in addition to having been at Progressive, my entire team, my whole career at Progressive, anytime I was a leader was a remote team. So I have over 20 years of remote leadership. I have my entire team here at People Solutions Center is remote. In fact, I've never had somebody on my team who actually works in the same office as I do. That was an interesting way to learn to lead. And today people are like, well, a lot of us have done that now. But at the time, if you go back 20 years, I was very much a unicorn. There was no guidebook on how to do this remotely. What I learned in that time frame, because most of my peers did not have remote teams, so it was a unique situation to be in. One of the things that I learned that was most important is the things that you do when you have a remote or hybrid team are not any different than what we should be doing every day when our team is all sitting right outside of our door. The difference is when everybody is sitting right outside your door, we get a little bit sloppier about whether or not we actually do it, right? Because you have this glue in the middle that is, oh, I bumped into so and so in the hallway. So I might not have been intentional about checking in on them, but it turned out okay anyway. When you're leading in remote or hybrid settings, you have less room for not being intentional as a leader. And that's really the only difference. Everything else is like this, the practices are the same, the strategies are the same. You just have to be super intentional and thoughtful about it. And every day you have to be thinking about what have we done to ensure that that culture stays intact. And even when you roll out big changes, you need to think about, okay, is there anything that might be like, how do I need to shore up a little bit more because it might be different because we are all remote or we're hybrid in that setting. The three areas that I have found in general in culture, but even more so when you're talking about a remote or hybrid setting, the three pieces that are most critical to your success are this idea of building trust, creating role clarity, and then making sure that the team knows and understands how to engage in healthy conflict and not trying to resolve conflict. Well, resolve the kind that you think of as conflict, but instead, how do we encourage and facilitate really healthy conflict so that people are engaging in new and different ways? And throughout this afternoon session, I'm going to dive deeper into each of these and give you some ideas on like, well, how do you do that? And how do you do it particularly intentionally to make things to get to different outcomes than where you've been? We're going to start with this idea that, right, we've got to really think differently about teamwork because when we're all sitting right next to each other, if we imagine that place that we worked, we've all had one in our career where you're like, wow, we were the best team. We were amazing together. And it just kind of happened. It took time, but eventually it just magically happened. Well, it's not as magical as you think in terms of it should not be by happenstance. This kind of teamwork is actually a very intentional decision to build strategies into how you're going to work together to ensure that the team can collaborate. And if you sit around and wait for it to happen, it's highly unlikely that it will just gel on its own. It needs a boost. And at minimum, it needs an accelerator because trust takes time and trust is the linchpin to all of this. And if we just sit around and wait for trust to happen, it won't happen at the speed that we want. One of my favorite books is a book by a gentleman, Patrick Lencioni. He is one of the leading folks in team development and leadership. And he wrote a book called Five Dysfunctions of a Team. He adapted that same material for a book called The Advantage, same material written from a different perspective. Both excellent, both worth the read. Five Dysfunctions, he lays out this concept of that there are five behaviors that when teams do this well, they operate at their very highest level. And without one of these, right, the pyramid starts to break. And at the base of Lencioni's model is this concept of trust that we have to build up trust to a level, not just that I trust that when I do A, Stacy on my team will do B, but instead trust to the level that says, I'm willing to be vulnerable. I'm willing to say, you know what, that didn't feel good, or I didn't like the way that interaction went, or I disagree. right? I'm willing, or I don't know how to do that. I'm comfortable and confident enough to put myself out there so that knowing that the people that I'm working with will hold that trust very safely in their hands and will get to a better place together. But that's a different level of trust than a lot of teams ever invest time and energy in. We tend to focus on, well, at least everybody knows transactionally what's happening. I was having a conversation this morning with one of our clients' team members, and he's a newer team member, and he's been struggling. And as he shared with me some of the challenges he's run into, I asked him about, like, so where are you, like, how are you building connections with the other team members? And he's like, Katie, I'm just that person. I just need to get in a meeting and get out. We just need to get the transaction done. I don't need to spend time worrying about knowing what you do on your weekends and things like that. And I thought, that might work for his style, but this team is very much in a team that the relationships matter, and we've invested a lot of time and trust. And the minute they think you're being transactional, this team is going to shut you out. And lo and behold, that's what's happened, right? They've shut him out, and they're not intentionally withholding information, but they're not going out of their way to be like, you know what, he might not know how to do this thing, so let me make sure we're ahead of it and I save him before he falls, because he's treating them like a transaction. And there's probably a little bit to learn from both sides, right? And a lot of things we can do differently, but that's a key piece to really getting people engaged. Now, when teams build trust to that higher level, to vulnerability, then they can start to actually engage in healthy conflict. And this is key. Conflict, many of us go, well, aren't we supposed to be getting rid of it? But healthy conflict is really just problem solving, right? It's that setting where you've got a team that works so well together that somebody can throw out a crazy idea. And it doesn't matter if they're the owner or if the new person on the block, everybody is willing to engage and be like, yeah, I don't think that'll work. And here's why. And here's what we should do instead. And this is what's going on that you didn't know about. But we can have the dialogue and the conversation in a constructive way, for one. And more importantly, we're not all walking around on eggshells going, is it okay if I say that? Maybe I shouldn't say that. I might make them mad. I might hurt their feelings. Oh, maybe I'll say it offline, right? Teams that have high enough trust that they engage in healthy conflict get all of it out there on the table in a way that is highly respectful, but also allows people to really like have the conversation you need to have to get you to commitment. Because even if you don't take the idea that I came up with, if I feel seen, valued, and heard, then I'm going to commit to whatever decision the group made. And when we leave that room, I'm going to go after that goal or try that new process in a way that's completely different. And so all of this again goes back to the trust, because I'm not going to engage in conflict if I'm afraid I'll get hurt or I'll get chastised or I'll get retaliated against, or just like, what if I upset somebody? There's a whole style of people that just are worried they're going to make people mad. And that's not going to help bring out the best in everyone. It's Teams can get to that level of commitment with a pretty reasonable level of trust. If you want to get all the way up to creating a culture of accountability where not all accountability has to come from the top down, that's when the heavy lifting really starts to come into place, right? It's more difficult peer to peer to say, hey, we agreed we were going to do X by the state, and it hasn't happened. Like, help me understand or walk me through. Can I help? Right. Or to give somebody feedback that a meeting didn't go well or a conversation didn't go well takes a little bit more courage when you're peer to peer, particularly if you're not in a culture where that has been like rewarded in a way that is positive. And so it takes even more trust for me to know that when you hold me accountable, you're coming at it not to throw me under the bus or make me feel bad, but instead you're holding me accountable because you're willing to invest in me. You're wanting me to succeed. You're willing to give me feedback because if you help me, I will be even better. But that's what it takes. It takes a whole different level of trust to get there. But when we do all of that, the team results shift, right? People are rowing in the same direction and life becomes so much easier. And so these 5 behaviors are things that, as you're thinking about building culture, these are the behaviors that you have to ingrain in what your team does every day. But the most important part of it is trust, because every single time that somebody on your team, somebody new joins the team, somebody leaves the team, somebody changes a role within the team, it's this crazy thing about trust. All of those things shift the trust model just a bit. And we have to kind of find our settings again. And we've got to get like, we almost have to like start not totally from scratch, but we have to reinvest in those piggy banks, those pennies in the piggy bank, so that we can get the team back to where they need to be. Now, one of the things that we know about how do we build trust with one another, it doesn't just magically happen, right? The gentleman that was talking about it being a very transactional relationship, he's probably never going to get to trust if we don't change the way he's approaching it. And the key to building trust is that you, as a leader, have to spend some time self reflecting, and you have to be willing to share vulnerabilities. Now, one of the things that I think is typically a paradigm shift for leaders, we often bring in a new hire and we immediately go with, I'm glad I hired this person. We'll wait and see how they do. And we're waiting for them to earn our trust versus giving them our trust, because they're not going to follow us if they don't trust us, right? And for most people, you've got to trust me before I'm going to trust you. So we get into this weird dance when we're in leadership, especially if you are somebody that's naturally slower to trust. You're expecting everybody to trust you because of your job title. It's not going to work. We have to be willing to engage our team members in ways that show that, hey, as a leader, I'm willing to self reflect. I know what I'm really great at. I know where I need help. I know that I need to learn more about you so that I can be a better leader for you. And then we both have to be willing to share that information so that we're set up for success. One of my favorite tools in this space is DISC. For those of you who are not familiar with everything DISC, this is a personal styles model that helps you understand why we do the crazy things we do. It's a really simple way for us to get to know, first of all, how do I act as a leader? And more importantly, how do others perceive how I am acting? We've grown up inside our own brains our entire lives, right? We only know the view of the world that we have, and we tend to think everybody else has that same view of the world. I share a story all the time about when I was in junior high. I was an athlete in junior high. I played basketball. I was not particularly good. And I was really bad at hitting the basket, which is a really big part of that particular game. So my coach in 8th grade pulls my parents aside after basketball game. And he's like, "Hey, have you ever taken Katie to the eye doctor?" And my parents are like, "No, she's passed every eye exam we've ever taken at the school. Like, why would she need to go to an eye doctor?" My coach said, "Katie misses the basket to the same place like every single time. I think she doesn't see the same basket as everybody else." And I was like, "Huh, that's probably not good for my sport, right?" So lo and behold, I go to the eye doctor. Turns out my vision is awful, and I didn't even know it. We go to that night, Friday night, we go to the high school basketball game. And I'm sitting next to my parents in the same seat we sat in probably every Friday night during basketball season. And all of a sudden I look at my mom and I'm like, "Mom, their last names are on the back of the jerseys." My mom's like, "Yes, just like they've been every week." And I was like, "I've never been able to read those before." And she was like, "Well, why didn't you tell us?" I'm like, "I assume nobody else could read them either." So it never occurred to me to say something. Our personal styles are the same way. We've seen the world through those same eyes every single day of our lives. It's hard to know why somebody else might see that world differently, but it's really important. And when you can spend time with your team, first of all, for you as a leader to understand how they're most likely to approach problems and why they may have a million questions every time you give them information, or why setting a goal for one person that is higher than they could ever achieve for one person is really motivating, and for the other person is like you just rained on their parade and they can't achieve anything because they feel like it's not attainable. Knowing all of those pieces and parts are what makes a difference. and taking your team through a model like DISC, where you get information on each person's personal style, and then you can share and talk about how that's impacting how the team comes together, is one of the ways that you can dramatically improve trust across the organization. Some of the things that tools like Everything Disc, and there's others along the way. Myers-Briggs is another good one that folks will use. Berkman is one that I've seen used. I like DISC. I'm trained in all of them. I love DISC for most teams because it's really simple. There's 4 styles. It's not overly complex. But what it's going to tell you is, right, what are the strengths of my style? I always say, like, what are the superpowers of my style? What are the pieces of kryptonite, right? What are the things that maybe particularly when I'm stressed, cause me issues and being successful in my role? It also gives you great information around what are my motivators and what are my stressors, so that as a leader, you can recognize when I might be exhibiting my stress behavior, but also peer to peer, people understand, like, oh, she's doing that thing that she does when she's really stressed out. Maybe I should find out why she's stressed out. And now the team can have deeper conversations about why do they always start the same problem from 2 very different angles. This gives us the ability to, one, understand ourselves, but also understanding personal styles of any of these different options gives you a really great level of emotional intelligence to know how to adapt to the people around you. And so it's kind of the first step in that building of trust. The second exercise that I love to do, and this is one that you could do this at your next team meeting. And it's crazy. It seems so simple. And I will tell you, it works every single time, even in groups that are super uncomfortable with each other. This comes straight from Lencioni's book on 5 dysfunctions. And it's an exercise that he calls, it's kind of like that get to know you. And it doesn't matter if the team has known each other forever or if they just met today. Having everybody on the team answer these 3 questions. Were you born and what do you consider hometown? How many siblings do you have and where do you fall in the order? And story from your childhood that shapes who you are today. Now, the question number 3 does not have to be a traumatic story. Note that word trauma is not in there. There are very happy stories from our childhood that make us who we are today. But the idea behind these 3 questions is each one of them requires people to give a little bit more personal information, right? Trust a little bit more to share a piece of themselves. But at the same time, it gives everybody the flexibility to share at the level that they are comfortable. So you will have some people that are super reserved, and answering that 3rd question feels really weird for them. But they will share something. And just in that sharing something, it shows I'm trusting this group with this piece of information. The second one, you would be amazed if you think around your group of, like, your immediate group of networking friends, even outside of work. We all are sure we know everything about our really close friends. And yet, this is a question most of us cannot answer about our closest friends, right? I know people I've known for 20 years who are like, you have a sister? You must be the oldest. I'm like, nope, I am younger by 3 years. I had a friend I had volunteered with for 20 years. I was sure he was an only child. Turns out he is one of, there are a total of 4 siblings in his family. He is the only brother he's got 3 sisters, but I was certain he was an only child. And he's like, what made you think that? I'm like, I have no idea. I don't know what my only child stereotype is, but he apparently fit it. So just going around a group of people and having people share this gets them recognizing that, you know what, at the core, we are all human. We all grew up somewhere. We all have a funny story about where we grew up. We all have very funny stories about our siblings and how our families operate. And so it just starts to let people in on the trust model. It's a really quick exercise, depending on your group size, maybe, could be as short as 15 minutes if you're only a couple of people. I've done larger groups in an hour to an hour and a half. Sometimes we'll break people into smaller groups within a big group. But doing this kind of exercise starts to build that team piece of it. The next idea of how do you accelerate, right? It's not just about building trust, because some folks are like, well, we trust each other. It's how do you accelerate that speed of trust? This one is one of my favorites, whether you do it in a group setting or just have this conversation between you and your team members individually. But it's about getting people to articulate for you how do they approach trust and what is their speed of trust. There's a Stephen Covey book out there called Speed of Trust. If you're looking for a great leadership book, it's on my top 10 list. And it's really old and yet still really really relevant no matter what. But we do assume everybody approaches trust the same way that we do. And that is actually not true. There are people that are on this 10 end of the scale. They're very slow to trust. It can take a ton of deposits into the piggy bank before they're willing to trust. That trust can be broken almost instantaneously if you're not careful, and it can be really hard to get back. On the flip side, we have our ones. This is our group that I like to refer to as most likely to be stolen and make friends with the people that stole us. I fall squarely into this group. I walk through life with the assumption that everything everybody is doing is to help one another. We're in the process of looking for some assisted living for my mom, and I was on the phone with somebody that's kind of a salesperson, and they made a recommendation, and I was like, well, we were kind of looking at this other place instead. And he says, well, I don't know that I would recommend that place, and here was why. And I hung up the phone and told my husband, I'm like, well, they didn't recommend that place, so we shouldn't go there. And my husband's like, has it occurred to you that maybe they only get paid if you go to the other place? And I was like, well, nobody would do that. They're worried about my mom. And my husband was like, maybe I'll take the next phone call. So, right, I am likely to be stolen and fall for it every single time. And then in the middle, you have this group of people. This five area can sometimes look like they lead with trust, but the minute they sense it could be broken, they're going to back away very quickly. Or they're slow to trust, but once you've got their trust, you are kind of their ride or die, right? So it can look different for different people. The team exercise that I love to do with this is to explain those concepts to the team and then have them actually, if you're doing it in person, you can have people line up. If you're doing it virtually, you just have them hold up pieces of paper and write the number 1 to 10 on it. And I just have people share what was your number and tell us why. And the reason that's so impactful is most of us have never thought about, unless you teach the class like I do, you've never sat around and thought about, well, how do I trust people? And how long does it take? And what breaks my trust? And what builds it? You just kind of inherently, you know it, but you can't articulate it. And getting people to share that can be game changing. And some of the reason that, and the visual of this, because I will tell you, your ones have no idea that there are people walking around in this world at a 10. And so they kind of look down the line like, oh, well, how am I going to earn your, like, I thought we were at trust a long time ago, right? And if you think about Lencioni's model, if I think we're at trust, then I'm going to start to engage in healthy conflict, and you may not trust me yet. The other interesting part that has come out after all my years of teaching this over and over again through our leadership classes and team development classes is for people on the scale, the one end of the scale, like and trust tend to be very similar. If I trust you, I tend to like you. And it would be hard for me to trust you if I didn't like you. They're very much linked together. For the people at the 10 scale, I can like you. It doesn't mean I will trust you. And those are two very different measures in a 10's mind. And this came out of my team doing this exercise when we had a new hire join, and she was a 1. And I have several folks on my team that are like 10, 11, 12s if they got to rate themselves higher. And the 1 was sitting there going, oh my gosh, like how much am I going to have to lift to earn till you like me? And she said that word out loud. And one of my most reserved team members looked at her and said, oh, Nicole, I already like you. I just probably won't ever truly trust you, but I totally like you. And I was like, oh, that's a big aha moment, right? But you need the team to understand those things so that our expectations are set. Because when people don't trust us, we tend to assume it's because we've done something wrong. Well, if I'm working with a 10, they're never going to trust me. So I can let go of that fear, right? The next piece of accelerating this trust is getting the team and or team members to talk about what behaviors build trust and what derails trust. And all of these exercises, the last one and this one too, they're great group exercises to create what are kind of your group norms about around trust. And they're easy to do on a Zoom call because people are happy to talk about stuff like this. Like they will share when you ask the questions the right way. But also, as new people join your team as a leader, these are great questions to ask the new hire one on one so that you, as a leader, understand where they're coming from and can meet them where they are. That way you're building trust with that new hire, and now they will follow you as their coach much faster than they would have otherwise. But teams with low trust tend to, right, when there's no trust, the whole culture feels weird. We're either throwing each other under the bus or we're walking on eggshells or everybody only goes to the manager. It's a really exhausting way to operate. One of the other sort of great, especially if you're remote, this is a wonderful way to make sure you're connecting regularly. We use this on our team. Every Monday morning, we do a 30-minute touch base just to check in because I want to start the week knowing like, how's everybody doing? Where are you at mentally, right? And so on our team meeting, we do roses, buds, and thorns. And so you only have to share two. So, and you can pick which two categories you want to share. But your roses are what was a success you had. It can be personal or professional. A bud is something you're looking forward to. And a thorn is a challenge that you're experiencing or something you could use help with. And just getting people to share this like on a weekly basis. And again, it lets everybody pick how much you feel like you want to share and how much you don't. I have some people on my team that they're more reserved. They don't want to share personal information, but they always share something meaningful about what's going on in their workspace that lets them connect with one another without having to feel like we're like making them share information. So that can be a really great tip. Be consistent on it and make sure that folks are feeling comfortable enough to do it. The other one, my team has done this one several times. We always enjoy it. And my husband tells me I have to come up with something other than a flower because it doesn't feel very like it's hard to like if I've got a team of all men, they're like, really, we're doing a flower exercise? But the concept works really well. The idea is you put the team together and you get smaller groups for this. I would suggest doing this in groups of like 6 to 7 people. You can do as small as 3 to 4. But the idea is we stand in our group and or work virtually in our group. If you're on Zoom, you can do this in breakout sessions, and the team has to come up with things that are either unique to or common for everybody that's in the group or unique to only one person. So for example, if everybody in our group has siblings, then we would put that like we would draw. If you're in person, you draw it. If you're virtual, then you do this like you can do it electronically. They just make a list, right, of one list of here's all the things that we all had in common. And then they have to come up with things that like turns out that maybe I am the only person that's an only child. And so that would go in the purple color or in the other column if you're doing this virtually. But it's a great way because quite honestly, the first couple come pretty easily. We go through things like, are we generally the same age? Where are we from? How many siblings do we have? Like those kinds of things. But the longer you let the exercise go, the further we have to ask each other about things that you might not think about. First time I did this with my team, it turns out like we found out that we have one person on our team that hates the Three Stooges. And there is no world in which of all my getting to know somebody, do you like the Three Stooges ever would have come up. But why it was important was she actually told us why she didn't like the Three Stooges. And it was very insightful. You wouldn't think this, but her reason for not liking the Three Stooges was because she felt like they were always mean to one another. And that told me a ton about what mattered to Sarah in her day to day and how she needed to be engaged in her culture, right? And who would have thought the Three Stooges would share that with me? So, right, there's all sorts of reasons to do this. It also gives you great ideas later on for like rewards and recognition, right? If somebody likes books, there's all sorts of ways we can use these things. But these kinds of activities to get people to share at a level they are comfortable with, because not everybody loves sharing personal information. It allows people to get to know one another enough that it accelerates the speed with which trust will happen, right? Once we have some trust and we've made it all the way up the pyramid, right, to commitment, The second piece of culture that's so important is role clarity. This is where I get a lot of teams who are like, we love working together. We're great. We're always so frustrated, but we know it's only because everybody's trying so hard. Typically, what we find in those situations is the issue is role clarity. Because let's be honest, right? Lots of things start to go wrong when people lack clarity in what they're supposed to do. The kinds of things that you will see happen is people will get frustrated that like they thought somebody else was going to do it and they can't figure out why it's not happening. And so they just give up, right? Or I thought somebody else was going to do it, so I didn't do it. And then somebody dropped the ball. If that happens too many times, I get a little annoyed and it starts to break trust, right? The other reason is role clarity can be if I think I am empowered to make a decision, but every time I do, the boss comes behind me and goes, well, why'd you do it that way? Guess what? My role wasn't very clear and I'm going to get really annoyed. And my boss just became a micromanager. So we've got to have clarity across roles so that the leader of the organization or the team can get out of the middle of it. When people don't know their role, the only thing they can do is to hold on to the lifeline that is their boss, and they won't make a move without them because they don't want to mess it up. They want to be successful. So if you are starting to hear things like, you always second guess me, you don't trust me, my boss is a micromanager, there's too many cooks in the kitchen, right? I got left out of the consultation. Or things like, right, I'm frustrated because I needed the decision and nobody told me, right? The answer already came out and nobody filled me in. People are making decisions that aren't actually their call in the first place. Or things are happening and everybody's like, what do you mean that's already done? Like, I have things that needed to be included in that, and you already made the decision. When you hear these phrases, and particularly when you hear them consistently or out of frustration, it is a big, big blinking red light that you are lacking role clarity in the organization. It is a common mistake, particularly the smaller your team. Everybody's probably been doing a great job of picking up whatever they needed to, right, as fast as they could to just make it all work. But nobody really knows why they picked up what they picked up. And so they don't really know where to go when there's a problem with it. There's two tools that are critical to making sure your team has role clarity. The first one is great job descriptions. Now, many organizations think of job descriptions as that like roted piece of paper in a desk drawer that has a lot of cobwebs in it that somebody hasn't read for 5 or 10 years. A great job description is something you should be pulling out of that desk drawer and looking at every 3 to 6 months. Because, right, people do pick up new things shift, and you've got to decide, do you want them to stay the way they are, or did you really mean for that person to take on that work intentionally? Also, as your organization grows, roles have to shift, right? You've brought in extra people, or there was work that didn't used to be a thing, but now that we're bigger, now there is more work to be done of a different type, and somebody just picked it up and ran with it, which is great. But is that really where it belongs? Or even if that's where it belongs, does everybody know that that's where it's getting done? And so having great job descriptions give you clear expectations, a great coaching tool, which builds trust, right? And more importantly, ensures that everybody has a really good understanding of what do you want me to focus my time on? Now, when we do job descriptions, we do not do them as a list of here's the 100 things that somebody should work on. That's not particularly helpful. Most people could make that job description pretty easily. Instead, we recommend if you're really trying to create role clarity, what you want to do is think about not only like what are the 5 to 7 big bucket areas of responsibility that you want this person to pay attention to and work on, but also what percentage of their time should they spend doing it? If we use this example, right, this is for like a team lead level role in one of my organizations. There's a big difference between a team leader who spends 60% of their time like actually doing the day-to-day work of an individual contributor. In this case, it was call center, so being on the phone, and 20% of their time coaching and developing their small team of 6 people. If we flipped those numbers and it's 60% leading and coaching your people and 20% being on the phones, it changes who might like the job. It changes how they would do the job. It changes whether or not they would be good at the job, right? So getting clarity around what this means and what this looks like is really important. If I flash back to the conversation I was having this morning, this was a division leader level job, a strategic level role. But when the new hire came in, they didn't have a lot of staff. They were understaffed. So he spent a lot of time early on being very operational, reasonable, right? But now he's 8 months in, they don't want operational anymore. They want strategic. And even as they were trying to course correct with this like performance conversation, right? His immediate answer was, okay, well, I'll go worry about all of these little tactical things. And when I talked to him this morning, I'm like, can I make a suggestion? And he said, yes. I said, don't go about this in terms of fixing each of the little tactical examples they gave you. I said, go find a conference room, put flip chart paper and mark all over the room and put up some markers and spend a day building your plan. Build the plan for what is it going to take for you to have course corrected this by the end of the quarter. And then share the plan, details, timelines, all of those things. This is a strategic role. We hired you to be strategic. If you try to solve this by being operational, you might achieve it and still frustrate them. And he was like, oh, I needed somebody to pull me out of the weeds. I'm like, yes, you did. And that's okay, right? But there's a difference in that versus if I really had hired him to be a frontline department manager, my answer might be very different. So spending time thinking about that can really help this role clarity piece. The next piece that is helpful in role clarity, your job description, right, is about what do I do as an individual. There's a secondary tool called a RACI chart, and RACI charts kind of show how all of the job descriptions come together. So if you think about this in terms of a symphony, right, the job description is the sheet music sitting in front of each of the musicians. The RACI chart is the sheet music sitting in front of the conductor that says this is when the percussion department joins, and this is when the woodwinds come in, and this is when, right, the flutes come in. All of those different pieces. It shows how the roles come together, not just how they stand individually. And RACI stands for responsible, meaning who's doing the work, accountable, meaning who's the decision maker, consulted, meaning you've got to get my opinion before you move forward, but you don't necessarily have to take my opinion because I am not the final decision maker, and informed. When do I need to be told what to do? You can use this for processes. So it is not uncommon. I'm working with a client right now. They are transitioning. They are kind of merging in another organization into their own. And so they're bringing on a lot of new members. It's in a nonprofit space. They're bringing on a lot of new members. And so there's some new processes, and they're like, well, who's going to do this? And who's going to do that? And like, do we have to go to the executive director for everything? And the first thing we did was we made a list of all of the things that were going to be tasks that were going to come over. And we went through and agreed on who's going to do the work, who's going to be the final decision maker, when do you need to consult the executive director or somebody at the third party or anything like that, and then who needs to be informed as things are done. And when we do this, we've got to start with who are the stakeholders that need to be involved. Then you figure out the tasks and whether it be a specific process or at a very high level, right? Thinking about a bigger picture organizational structure. Then you go through and literally assign RACI to each of the different tasks and decide which roles go into that. And then you end up with a matrix. And this is a perfect example of one we often do with clients, particularly if they are hiring a new role into the organization. This is critical. And this is an example from a situation where we hired a GM or a COO type of role. We spent time thinking about, right, because owner suddenly is giving up a lot of responsibility and a lot of ownership. And in this case, it was an owner who was going to have a little bit of trouble letting go of things that they've always been the final decision maker in. And so we went through and said, all right, let's decide, owner, when do you still want to be the one doing something? When is it, you know what, the GM's going to do the work, but as owner, I get final say so on whether or not that's what we're going to do. Sometimes, right, like for example, on the analyzed financial results, This case, we said no. GM is both going to do the analysis, they're the final maker on what recommendations are going to come from that. We do want them to sit down and spend time with the owner and talk about here's what I'm seeing, here's what I'm thinking, and here's how I'm going to move forward. But the owner gets this was a hard one. We talked about this for a long time. The owner said, "No, I don't want to be in the day-to-day and making that final decision. I want a GM that's strong enough that I would go, yeah, here's a couple things you might want to think about, but ultimately your decision." I'm like, great. That's a different person in that role than the person who's going to be okay with you stepping in all the time and saying, nope, you can't do that. Nope, you can't do that. That's not the right strategy, right? So when you build this, it helps you not only decide who you need to hire, but more importantly, with your existing team, this is a tool that keeps everybody from always coming to you as the leader. Because people will assume if your title says manager, owner, leader, they assume you are the accountable for everything. And if you want to empower people, you've got to get out of that accountability space. All of the RACI charts and job descriptions are your number, like your top two tools for getting role clarity. And the value in them is in the conversations, not just in the document. So if you end up with a piece of paper in a drawer that gets cobwebs on it, not going to help you nearly as much. But when you ingrain in the organization, every time something falls through the cracks or every time people are frustrated because it was messier than it needed to be, we call a quick timeout and we say, hold on a second, let's do a quick RACI chart and make sure we're all aligned, because most of the time everybody drew different conclusions and therein lied some of the holes or pockets that you're running into. The last piece that we want to make sure, right, as we think about all of the different pieces that really help build culture. And again, this is about intentionally building culture, not just throwing parties. The last piece is really about how the organization addresses conflict. If you build trust high enough, conflict becomes the driver behind all of the great things you're going to do as an organization. Conflict becomes problem solving that helps us go, I had idea B A and Loretta had idea B. Neither one of them were perfect. So, but together we came up with idea C, right? That's what happens when trust is that high. Trust is so high that I might, as the owner, say, and I just did this a couple weeks ago. You showed up in a way that I never want to, right? I was sure we were all doing it one way. Everybody else was sure they were doing it another. I just opened my big old mouth and was like, well, we should always do it this way. I didn't really mean we should always do it that way. I just spit words out of my mouth. And then everybody thought they were doing it wrong and everybody freaked out because the owner said so. And I was like, but guys, if the owner's wrong, just tell me to shut up. I did it wrong. And they're like, there's no world in which we're going to do that. And I'm like, okay, then you know what? We need to make sure trust is high enough that you don't have to be rude about it, but that you would say, even to me, you know what, Katie, I think you're wrong. And here's why. The great news was everybody did come back to me the next day and said, Katie, I think you're wrong. And I went, oh, you are 100% right. Thank you for helping us, right? But that's the key, is that there's enough trust that people will tell you those things. Otherwise, as owners, you just think you're walking through the world knowing all of the answers. But how you create an environment where that healthy conflict happens is really critical, because it's not natural for most people. And many people have never worked in an organization where that's the case. So we get into this habit as leaders of trying to like make sure conflict doesn't happen. And I would tell you, this is your biggest mindset switch. You want conflict to happen. You just want it to happen in a really productive way. And productive conflict is when we can have an open conversation and I can ask questions and I can say, I totally understand. My intent was not to make you feel bad, but I 100% get that that was my impact. Walk me, like I said this to one of my team members. I know that was my impact. I have a guess as to what I did that created that impact, but it would be really helpful to me if you would share specifically for you, what about that conversation left you feeling that way? And the example she shared was actually different than the one she agreed that mine didn't help the situation, but she actually spotted an example 2 sentences before what I thought I had said that caused her the anxiety over it. And so, but we were able to have that healthy, productive conflict in a way that we both walked away feeling better. and we resolved the problem that started the whole thing along the way. But it takes nurturing that and being really intentional about making sure people know it's a safe space to have that kind of conflict. So like our trust exercise, spending time thinking about how does your team approach conflict, because this is very much key to your culture. Some organizations are at the 10 level. They actively promote healthy conflict. They're constantly doing things like like not just brainstorm this, but like let's take a vote on these sort of things, or let's do the SWOT analysis. And people come excited and ready to engage on a process, on a procedure, on a new idea. On the one side of the scale, these are organizations where everybody's like, ooh, conflict. We better make sure that goes away. We don't want conflict. I don't care if it's healthy or not. I do not want to engage in conflict. Conflict is bad. This is the group that by the time they've gotten through a presentation with a team development thing with me, by the end of the first session, they're like, if you say the word conflict one more time, I'm going to throw something at you because I'm sick to my stomach. There are people in this world that go through life trying to just stay away from conflict. And that's not good or bad, but we've got to make a setting where even they are comfortable. And then in the middle of the road is your team in a space where you engage in healthy conflict on topics that are safe, right? Where people feel like, yes, everybody's open to this feedback, everybody's willing to engage, and I won't get hurt if I say something wrong, but maybe they avoid it when it comes to meaningful topics. Right. There's a conversation, conversations where with I will tell somebody, have you told your owner that that's not working well for you? And they're like, ooh, no, that would not be welcomed. Right. They're going to take their toy and go home. They don't know if it would be welcomed or not, but their assumption is that it's not safe. So even just talking about this within your organization and thinking about where does your team fall on this continuum gives you a sense of how much time you need to do it. Now, your job as a leader isn't anymore to resolve the conflict, but instead, how do you facilitate conflict? How do you make it safe? One of the tools that I love to use is this red, yellow, green card. I actually go out and my team all actually has some plastic red, yellow, green cards at their desk so that they can use these when I'm facilitating. Like if we've got an idea and we're debating option A or option B, I'll say, okay, who likes option A? Hold up your green card, right? Who likes option B? Hold up your green card. Or and sometimes I'll just say, this is the idea we're talking about or that I'm recommending. Green card if you're in line with it, yellow if you're still unsure and you're not quite on board, red if you're like, Katie, this is the worst idea ever. But it visually gives them a way to say, like, yeah, I'm not loving where you're going, so that I can decide, should I push through? Should I pull back? Do I see what questions people have? But by doing it, allows people to safely say, I'm not on board, so that we can decide whether or not we move forward, and then also make sure that everybody feels like they're committed. No matter how they felt about it, they were heard and seen, and therefore they're committed. Right? The reality is, if we don't change our approach to conflict and to trust and to role clarity, if we don't do anything different, we're always going to end up where we've ended up. And so these are hopefully some best practices that really help you see that being intentional about how you do these things gives you a different culture. Again, particularly important if you're remote or hybrid, you've got to give people ways to engage, because otherwise that team meeting just becomes everybody sitting on Zoom, nodding their head, and then they get off and go, yeah, I'm not in agreement with that, right? It's harder to read when you're not in person. So these become really, really critical tools. One of the last best practices that I want to touch on is just shifting your problem solving techniques. We tend to start with brainstorm all of the ideas, right? Like, let's just get all the ideas out there and then we'll argue, then we'll debate which one we like. I actually teach teams to change that process. So instead, we start with align on what problem we're trying to solve, because oftentimes two people might be trying to solve two different problems. And so which idea is the better idea will automatically be different. Then instead of solving the problem, we align on the criteria by which we will evaluate the solutions. It is easier for people to talk about what their decision criteria are without so much emotion and passion that they're stuck behind, like they're stuck in the sand. So we align on criteria, and in some cases, we even rank order the criteria. Then we talk about solutions, and then we make a decision. I took a leadership team through this exercise over the last week because they were finding everybody always they have co-CEOs. Imagine how hard that is, right? Co-CEOs, and everybody's always going to like I went to this one this time. Next time I'll go to this one, and there's like often people are testing out whether or not they're aligned. Thankfully, they are really aligned and they do a really great job of upholding that trust, but it's hard. And so we actually came up with, for every decision that they try to make this year, here are the top 5 criteria that they're going to use to evaluate those decisions so that they can share that with their team members, so that they came up even with like, and here's the rank order that they need to meet in order for us to decide yes or no, because they're going through some really big strategic changes. And so they said, like, here's how we're going to make decisions. And sometimes something might rank a little higher and might make it a little lower, but at least you know what's going into our decisions. It's going to bring a ton of clarity to their decision making process and the commitment from people along the way. The other exercise, when you get to the point of come up with ideas, as opposed to just having people yell ideas out, use do a post-it note exercise. This is give everybody a stack of post-it notes and have them write whatever. If you're trying to solve a problem or if you're trying to gather feedback, you write one concept per post-it note and you put them all up on the wall, and then you look for trends. But by giving people post-it notes, it allows your more introverted team members to reflect a bit before they decide whether or not they want to share, and they don't have to be the loudest voice in the room to actually be heard. There's a way to do this very virtually through chat. So you can do, or using whiteboards, you can do virtual post-it note exercises that are really, really helpful for people. The key is you have to start facilitating conflict and stop trying to resolve it. Teams that only resolve conflict, you as a leader are exhausted because there's a lot of it to go around and it's usually not the healthy kind. When you facilitate conflict, you're bringing about the healthy conflict, which is really just really great problem solving, and it builds trust for the team, across the team, and for you as a leader. And those are the 3 pieces, right? Great cultures rely on trust, role clarity, and conflict. The key is, right, in any environment, these are super important. In a remote or hybrid environment, they take more intentionality, although I would argue that most of my teams that are not remote don't spend enough time being intentional about this either. You just get away with it a little bit more when you are in person all of the time, because some of the trust stuff happens more easily. Role clarity, if trust isn't broken, role clarity will just come, right? So, some great tips for you. Again, I will send out the slides afterwards. In addition to that, one of the things that we always offer to folks that have taken time out of their day to join us for a webinar, in addition to giving you slides and all that, is access to our free HR strategy session. This is an hour with me directly to talk about what are the challenges that you are faced with, whether it be culture driven, or I just did a session yesterday on compensation, or any of the HR challenges, leadership development that you might be facing. We spend an hour together. I give you some great advice and suggestions. I can also do a full strategy session during that of kind of evaluating where are you today in terms of your HR processes and practices, and what kinds of things might you need to do to help support the culture that you're wanting to give. If you click on that QR code and put in your information, I'll send you that, you'll get the follow-up to get scheduled for that HR strategy session. And we'll spend some time just talking about, what kind of tips do you want to take from this and implement as you go forward. I am going to stop the recording there so that folks have a second if you would like to ask any questions.